And we have the weighty topic of discussing the cultural legacy that a design team can have when artworks are meaningfully integrated into the overall building project. And I'm hoping the two of you are going to kind of get the ball rolling by saying a little bit about your own position on this. Lee, do you want to kick off on that?
So my background is not actually in architecture. I'm more of a crafts background. So my teachings were in silversmithing and jewellery. That sort of evolved into larger bits of architectural work. So my question really is in terms of art and architecture and how that best sits. Coming back to Peter's question earlier, is whether the current framework is correct for commissioning bits of artwork really within buildings. So I suppose that's maybe a good point to talk around, I think, really.
Well, I'll just say something about us. I mean, I'm an architect, partner of Atomic Architecture. We have a studio in London and one in Kazakhstan, which is a long story.
As you do.
As you do. And we kind of work as we'd have quite a broad range of projects, different types, different programs, different types of clients. But something that unites those is the process that we go through to kind of develop our projects. We very rarely kind of know where it's going to end up before we start. Not that we sell things that way, but one of the most recent interesting ones is working with Alice on level 2 upstairs, where it was a total collaborative process where we got to pick an artist out of a short list or long list, and the roles were totally dissolved. It was a total joint venture. We didn't know where we were going to go. We just started drawing. We started talking about ideas, and the project came out. And we've done that on a couple of projects where we from the very inception of a project, we worked collaboratively with an artist. So that's just something where we come from. But,
and what would you? Because we talked about this a little bit earlier, didn't we? About what that actually means. So we've approached this from lots of different kind of points of view, I guess. From partnering with an artist to saying, well, the boundaries don't matter. It's all sort of design, practice, and creative thinking. But where would you say those different collaborations have taken you in terms of a particular work or as a practice? I mean, would you now see that as core to the way that you operate?
I think it would be great to apply the process we went through upstairs on a more commercial project. Would be fascinating experiment. Like you say, I mean, really, you can just go ahead and try these things and see where they go, and it would be great to go with that. We already, every time a competition comes up, we think we should wonder whether it's too soon to give Alice a call and see if she wants to go in on it. But I understand that there's certainly projects and clients and briefs that's totally not appropriate for. The more kind of commercially driven.
But then to counter that, though, coming back to your thoughts earlier of, the world becoming more of a homogenous place and people wanting to seek out a corporate identity, that sort of, it lends itself to, do you not think otherwise, that being injected at an earlier point, in terms of commercial projects and trying to sort of change the overall...
Yeah, I think...
thinking of a commercial developer or...
I think going back to the question's quite a strange one that we've been set, the kind of the design team legacy.
It's one of the worst sort of exam questions, isn't it?
But I think one of the things the design team have the opportunity to do, and particularly as an architect, engaging with a client day one, is to find out whether that is an aspiration, and if there is that aspiration there, to be able to build the team, help build those legal relations, to construct a design team that's got that sensitivity or that interest.
I just wonder, in relation to your point, Lee, I wonder whether it really necessarily is something that a client needs always to be aware of. I mean, if as a practice, whatever your practice is, you choose to work with a different group of skill sets, then it produces a different sort of richer product, arguably, or a richer outcome. That one would hope the clients would enjoy and identify with, and therefore commission more of it. So
Yeah.
it's in a way, it's up to us as practitioners, I think,
Yeah.
as much as anything, to develop those different sort of collaborations and
Yeah.
different ways of working.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a conscious decision always, perhaps, that an artist is brought into the fold in that way.
I really liked something that Giles mentioned earlier about that, those roles, and something you mentioned as well, Peter, that it's not about those kind of definitions of people working together, that actually everyone has a different background with different approaches and different ideas of how you can do things, and perhaps easy. I mean, going back to working with Alice Theobald again, that actually we didn't have those boundaries. We all said there's a brief, and we'll just go with it and see where it comes out. There wasn't, this is an art bit, you've got to do this bit, kind of.
Well, I think that's where real creativity springs from, isn't it? I mean, that collaboration of...
Well, in terms of having a defined canvas, do you think?
Well, no, I think just
or
in not knowing where it's going to go. I mean, I think in terms of, collaboration works when you've got people with different perspectives and different points of view and different skill sets and different experiences. Otherwise, there's no point in collaborating.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bit that I think is exciting and interesting in the whole process. But I guess my point earlier was that, artists or people who call themselves artists have worked with architects since time immemorial, in different ways, and it's expressed in different ways. Do we want to open this up to a broader discussion? I mean, if we've got anyone who would like to make a contribution here. Yes, thank you.
Obviously, clients are so different, but for many, I can imagine the idea of bringing more thought about the artistic sort of look of a building as quite an indulgence. There's always, the budget and how much things will cost, and how do you kind of transfer, obviously with public buildings, you've got your art budget. How do you transfer this to the everyday? Obviously, with Giles's work, he's done that, but I wonder at Gramsby, how much does a Gramsby'd up house go for? Can the local people actually afford it? Now it's a lovely. I mean, I'd love to have a house
I think that you're on next then, Giles.
Houses are socially rented, because it's community land trust. Half of them are socially rented and half of them are for sale, but at social value. So they're like they were partly subsidised, but I mean they were also, because of that, there was very little money with which to make them, so the budgets for them were pretty small. It varies depending on, some of the early ones were done for less and some of them are now being done for slightly more, but between about £50,000 and £70,000. So there's not a lot of money going into those things, and in a sense, like that's what I think an artist can do, is provides creativity within limited means. You don't need to spend money to be creative necessarily, but sometimes it can be expensive. But I think if the brief is to be economical, that is an extraordinary opportunity for creativity.
Well, your group has demonstrated that very ably.
I guess I'm interested in the question that Lee raised earlier about, or I guess how your experience relates to the question that you asked, which is your question being like, how can artists be brought on earlier in the process? It suggests that you've had a lot of experience.
Yeah, that probably was a bit of a loaded question, to be honest. In terms of there's probably at present I probably have about half a dozen projects of being brought potentially sometimes too late into that equation, in terms of I feel sometimes it could be more of a holistic approach. If you otherwise you can romanticize the idea of returning back to it being of a Renaissance approach between artists and architecture, but I still feel that it's a little bit too formulaic, in terms of you have here's an aperture, and I appreciate that. That's that's a creative thing to do in itself, to respond to a given space or a certain materiality. But I think that, do you see where I'm coming from? That you could otherwise, in terms of the overall picture of artists and architecture, that if it is otherwise a grassroots, I suppose the impression I'm getting from you, Giles, is that you're doing that, and it's very much at a grassroots starting point, which is really exciting. And I think that's what motivates me personally, is just to see how that, almost, I don't want to sound, it is a bit more of it's an avant-garde thing. I suppose it's more of a movement in itself in terms of, what has been before in terms of.
Well, I think when we started to develop the idea of the Baltic Rider exhibition, it was precisely to try and explore those sort of more fundamental relationships, and to get people thinking in different ways. And in that case, in the case of this exhibition, we didn't encumber the artist, if you like, we can call it the artist, with all of the kind of constraints that normally go into a building project. We rather did it the other way around and freed up the architect to kind of think more freely in a sort of sensory and sort of spatial sense. But the idea behind it was, that it's a melting pot of creativity with everyone contributing to something that's an end product that no one individually would have thought of. It's that creative endeavour, isn't it? It's whatever, it's whatever sparks.
I suppose that's how does that cross over from being in a gallery confined and controlled context into, the real world, so to speak. That's interests me really, in terms of it being a more of a holistic approach between artists and architecture.
Well, it's one of two things, I guess. You either need a very enlightened client who's going to kind of encourage that mix, or you do what these guys have done. You just kind of get on and do it by becoming part of the design team and producing a better product as a result.
But it sounds like Granby had that perfect mix of kind of, it was the right people that would all come together to do that. You had, the financial backing that was there at the beginning. Those, everybody was on board in the same way from the start. And perhaps those projects just aren't that common. But when they are, they can be, they can be great.
Yeah, Richard.
Lee, I've been fortunate enough to see one of your presentations.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact buildings, but there's one where you were turning a corner where you were involved relatively early, and then another, I think it was Jean Nouvel, where you came in slightly later.
It's a project with Raphael Vanoli, Would it help?
Yeah, which is it?
There's a folder, I think, on the desktop there.
Called Lee.
That one. Yeah. So I said, just in this instance, this very much was the canvas type approach in terms of the original brief was, to fill this aperture here with a given piece of artwork to otherwise fulfill, which seems to be, it's almost a little bit of a political byproduct really, in terms of, like, you must be familiar with the Section 106 agreements that, you otherwise have to fulfill a bit of public artwork, and it's otherwise, how do you break from it just being almost a token gesture? So, I suppose in that instance, it was a bit challenging, given that this was the given area. So, in terms of from a personal point of view, I thought I wanted to challenge the architecture a bit more. So, and in terms of create something that was contextual and related to the local narrative, and so just to skip on a few more images, it was born out of the idea of a study of like the local topology in terms of a collage of 16th century maps to present day. So I don't know. I think hopefully it will be a success, this project. But I'm just thinking in terms of it always intrigues me whether this could have happened at an earlier date, what the outcome could have been, because there's so if that makes sense.
It makes absolute sense, right. and you're absolutely right. I think this whole process of bringing the minds together early, the earliest possible moment, brings this true richness.
I
think. Do we have any other views? Thanks, Richard. Anybody burning to ask any more questions?
Well, just a broader one, really. Just thinking about, in a way, something like Assemble and the way that it's kind of come into the art world with the Turner Prize. It sort of shakes up a little bit the art world, but also in a way the thoughts really from Assemble's point about architecture in terms of the Turner Prize, the kind of press attention, it drives a conversation maybe also within the architectural world. And it's just interesting in this context to be able to sort of raise this, because there's no question there's been a lot of discussion about Assemble, but I'm just quite intrigued by this idea of kind of coming together of both sides, because it does demonstrate, and demonstrates that in particular. Yeah.
Giles, do you want to
One
respond
for
to that?
Giles.
I mean, I guess it wasn't quite a question, was it? But I mean, it's kind of difficult because we talk about our work in both terms of it being architecture and it being art. And in general, they're just kind of useful terms for getting whatever it is you need to get done. And actually, we found that a lot of the conversation around our work has been surprising to us. It's not us who's saying that this is art and it actually relates to kind of socially driven art that is very kind of in vogue at the moment, and like the kind of world of stuff that's happening in terms of galleries like MIMA and other things like that, and that's kind of happening in a slightly different world to the one in which I guess we feel like we're working in. And equally, I guess the kind of conversation about, oh well, they're not architects, so is that kind of challenging the kind of authority of the kind of traditional architect role? Again, doesn't feel like one that we've deliberately set out to kind of challenge or be part of that conversation. So I mean, it is a kind of surprise to us constantly how much we provide kind of conversation for other people to have. And I guess it's great to be able to kind of provoke that. But for us, the way in which we aim to kind of continue to work is through the work, and it's very difficult to kind of really participate in either of those conversations when you feel like the thing that you're really interested in is a very small part of Croydon or whatever.
But you don't need to engage in the conversations, do you? You can just demonstrate by doing. And I suppose what all of this is about is that architecture, in its fullest sense, cannot be hidebound by any sense of traditional professional disciplinary boundaries. It's a much greater endeavour, and I guess that's what we're all sort of moving towards here.
Yeah.
There was another question, I think.
You kind of touched on it a little bit then, but I think that as architects, we've got to take a little. Perhaps we need to take more of a lead, and I think there are set more of an example, perhaps. And I think whilst the principles of modernism perhaps were very laudable, that it has resulted now in kind of a stripping back of any joy, really. And I think the work that perhaps that Assemble have done is kind of shown another way perhaps to kind of regain some of that ground. And I think the more people see it, then the more there is the opportunity to do it. So I think as architects we have to really try and champion that cause, perhaps of making sure that the art and craft is probably integrated into the buildings at a much earlier stage. Bring back a bit more joy to our streets.
Thanks, Mike. You're absolutely right. Right, I'm getting that. Thanks, everyone. I mean, how do you sum up an event like this? But just very, very quickly, Jonathan, I was just absolutely. I suppose I just loved the idea of these historic paintings being the force, the catalyst for such a huge process, a huge endeavour on your part, and to for you to suddenly find yourself as a patron of great contemporary architecture, as well as a custodian of some historic architecture, all springing from the force and the power of those paintings. I think was fantastic. I think we've talked a lot about the Giles's points, and I just loved that, in terms of, I suppose, where I was trying to get to on a city scale, if you like, or on a larger scale, this sort of sense of the expression you use of those embellishments that make houses homes, that just bringing that right down to a small community and domestic scale, and just enriching that whole process of design through bringing together those different skills, but also predominantly through community involvement, engagement, and community ownership. I thought was great. And Richard, I just think it's fantastic. We're going to have a centre for architecture here in the northeast, and you guys as a global digital information gurus sat right in our midst here is just wonderful to know that's continuing. So thank you very much, all of you, and thanks to you guys for the discussion at the end.